I allowed them to launch a product they'd spent $100 million developing. I watched my former partner celebrate his triumph like a king. But the next morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, sheer terror washed over him when he realized the single component that made his product valuable now belonged to my 22-year-old granddaughter. This wasn't just revenge. This was a surgical financial execution. My name is David, and I'm 65. For 30 years, I poured every ounce of my lifeblood into Innovatech, the engineering firm I built from a garage startup into an industry leader. We weren't just making simple parts. We pioneered a unique, proprietary metal alloy, let's call it Titanium X, that revolutionized efficiency in our specialized manufacturing sector. That alloy was the core of everything we did, the crown jewel and the foundation of our entire multi-million-dollar business. It was my patent, my design, and my lasting contribution to the world. 10 years ago, I brought in Nick. He was undeniably sharp, highly ambitious, and saw the world in high-definition digital, while I was, admittedly, still sketching blueprints on paper. I didn't just mentor him. I fast-tracked his career, promoting him to junior partner and giving him massive responsibilities. I treated him more like the son I never had, sharing every secret of the business, including the deep, technical knowledge behind the alloy. I gave him complete control over the daily operations, trusting him implicitly to respect the legacy we were building together. If you want to hear more stories about corporate betrayal and how sweet revenge can be, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. You definitely won't want to miss how this plays out. That trust, however, was the fatal flaw. Nick's ambition eventually outgrew his gratitude and even his common decency. He stopped seeing me as a visionary mentor and started seeing me as a relic, a bottleneck holding back his modern vision of a digital-first company. The whispers started subtly in the board meetings, polite comments about my traditional or outdated methods. Nick would often dismiss my operational advice, smiling thinly and saying, "We'll handle that the modern way, David." Then those whispers became loud, aggressive demands. The air in the executive suite grew cold, and I realized too late that the familial bond I cherished had completely dissolved into a hostile takeover strategy. He and the few new board members he had cultivated began actively undermining my authority. The climax of this tension arrived when Nick, with cold efficiency, scheduled a mandatory all-hands board meeting. I knew in my gut this meeting was not about quarterly profits or technical innovations. It was about defining my exit. He was finally ready to tell me, the founder, that I was obsolete, and it was time for the old dog to be put out to pasture. The mandatory board meeting felt less like a strategic session and more like an execution. The conference table, the same one I'd personally selected 20 years ago, now felt like a wooden firing squad. Nick sat opposite me, flanked by two new directors he'd brought in, young, hungry, and entirely devoid of loyalty to the company's history. I started to present the quarterly projections, expecting a routine, albeit tense, discussion. But Nick cut me off, his voice smooth and unsettlingly formal. "David, with all due respect, we need to address the future, not just reread the past." He then launched into a professionally hostile monologue. He used every corporate buzzword to paint me as the villain of stagnation. Legacy system, lack of digital integration, obsolete methodology. He even mentioned my insistence on using Titanium X as a core product, calling it an unnecessary anchor in a rapidly shifting market. It was a premeditated, calculated attack. He hadn't called this meeting to discuss anything. He'd called it to deliver a verdict. "We appreciate your decades of foundational service, David," he said, leaning back, the picture of condescending confidence. "But your vision is limiting our scalability. Innovatech needs to move beyond its single alloy focus, beyond the old-school processes you champion." The board, following my recommendation, has voted. We are enacting the clause for immediate transition of executive control. Effective today, you are asked to accept early retirement. The room spun. My own company. The betrayal was so sharp it physically hurt. I looked at the directors, searching for one flicker of dissent, but found only cold, practiced neutrality. Nick finished the humiliation by sliding a severance package across the table, a contract designed less as a reward and more as a gag order. "I built this from nothing, Nick," I finally managed, my voice rough, the decades of mentorship evaporating in an instant. He just shrugged, his smile cold. "And we are grateful. Now we evolve. The next decade belongs to the aggressive, David, not the entrenched. Please sign the papers. We need the office cleared by the end of the week." His eyes didn't hold regret, only victory. I didn't sign immediately. I stood up, feeling the weight of 30 years of work being erased in a single, cruel minute. They thought they had defeated me, banished me. But as I walked out, my initial grief hardened into something cold and sharp. They wanted my seat, but they forgot I still held the blueprint to the kingdom. They had just given me the greatest gift a vengeful man can receive, an irrefutable motive. Leaving the building that day felt like attending my own funeral. The guards I had hired years ago now watched me with pity, and the young employees avoided eye contact, shuffling their papers as I walked past. 30 years reduced to a cardboard box filled with old blueprints and a ceramic mug. The severance contract, unsigned, sat heavy in my pocket, a constant reminder of Nick's arrogance. Drove home, not to retire, but to rage. The initial shock gave way to a cold, focused fury. Nick had publicly called my core creation, Titanium X, obsolete. He claimed Innovatech was moving beyond it. This public dismissal was his biggest mistake. My mind, still sharp despite Nick's dismissive comments about my age, started running the calculations. What was the main reason for his haste? He needed me out now because he was rushing the launch of his new flagship product, the Titan Next series. This series was supposed to vault the company into a new market bracket, justifying his takeover. I pulled up the preliminary blueprints for Titan Next, which I'd reviewed just weeks before my forced exit. I poured a strong coffee and spread the documents across my kitchen table. There it was, bold as day, in the technical specifications for the core component. Must utilize properties of Titanium X alloy. It was an inescapable truth. Nick's next generation product couldn't exist without my obsolete alloy. He could talk all he wanted about digital evolution, but the physical product required the unparalleled strength and heat resistance that only my patented formula could provide. Then came the moment of chilling clarity. The intellectual property for the alloy itself, the master patent, was not simply held by Innovatech. It was a common, subtle protection I'd set up during the company's early restructuring. The patent was licensed to the company, but the ownership was held by a separate, almost invisible, holding entity, a private trust I had complete, undisputed control over. In the chaos of the takeover, in the rush to push me out the door, Nick had overlooked the simple, non-corporate-owned licensing structure of the foundational technology. They stole my company, but they forgot to check the keys to the treasure chest. The realization hit me. I didn't need to fight them for my seat back. I just needed to wait until they committed everything they had to their launch. Then, I would pull the plug. The first thing I did after realizing Nick's fatal mistake was to call an old friend. Arthur. Arthur wasn't a flashy corporate lawyer. He was a meticulous specialist in trusts and estate planning, a man whose work was meticulous and quiet. We met at his private club, far from the glass walls of downtown. I laid out the entire situation, the betrayal, the rushed launch, and the critical loophole in the Titanium X patent ownership. Arthur listened, sipping his tea, his eyes twinkling. He didn't see an old man seeking petty revenge. He saw a genius engineer protecting his life's work. The master patent was already mine through a private holding entity. But to make the execution flawless, we needed an untouchable buffer. We decided to create a new, irrevocable trust, the Grace Trust, named after my granddaughter, Grace. The transfer of the patent ownership had to happen before I officially signed my retirement papers, making the move legally invisible to Innovatech's rapidly changing corporate records. Nick was focused on the big-picture takeover, not the obscure details of a 10-year-old trust agreement. This process was completed in 3 days, a blur of notarized documents, quiet phone calls, and signatures. It was silent, perfectly legal, and deeply satisfying. We transferred the entire patent ownership from my private holding company directly to the Grace Trust. Nick was so consumed by his perceived victory and the final launch preparation for Titan Next that he never even glanced at the licensing renewal schedule or the trust's minor regulatory filings. He thought he was taking the keys to the kingdom. What he actually inherited was a massive high-tech trap. I returned to Innovatech one last time to sign my departure papers. Nick looked smug, offering a superficial farewell handshake. As I signed away my executive rights, I knew I was only releasing the leash on a legal bomb that was about to detonate beneath his feet. The countdown had begun. The next 3 months were a psychological exercise in patience. I had to become the perfect retiree, an invisible man. I took up gardening, played golf badly, and even attended a few awkward neighborhood luncheons. In reality, I was a spy, constantly monitoring Innovatech through the quiet network of old contacts and publicly available financial reports. Nick was thriving in the vacuum I left. He immediately rebranded the executive floor, replacing my mahogany desk with something sleek and minimalist. He cut several R&D projects I considered crucial, diverting the funds entirely to the Titan Next launch campaign. His face was everywhere, in industry magazines, on financial news, always talking about his bold new direction and how he had finally steered the company away from its stagnant, old-fashioned roots. He even had the audacity to call me once. I was surprised, but held my poker face. "David, just calling to check in. Everything good with retirement?" he said, his voice dripping with forced casualness. "Couldn't be better, Nick," I replied, the truth hidden just beneath the surface. "Plenty of time to smell the roses. How's the Titan Next coming along? Heard you're pouring everything into it." "It's going to be a game changer," he boasted, completely missing the loaded question. "The biggest launch in company history. We're finalizing production and signing major contracts globally. I've really streamlined the manufacturing process, David. Got rid of some of those overly complex checks you insisted on." This detail was crucial. The complex checks he removed were quality assurances directly related to the stability of the Titanium X component under extreme stress. His cost-cutting and simplification weren't just careless. They were accelerating the company's dependence on the very patent I controlled. He ended the call with a final patronizing statement. "Glad you're enjoying your peace, David. We're doing what you always wanted, making Innovatech huge, just faster now." He hung up, convinced he was a corporate savior who had gracefully handled the retirement of a doddering old man. He had no idea the peace I was enjoying was the calm before the loudest, most financially devastating storm of his life. The launch date was set for the end of the month, and my finger was hovering over the nuclear button. The launch event for the Titan Next series was pure, unadulterated spectacle. Nick had rented a massive convention hall, justifying the lavish expense with the $100 million budget. I watched the live stream from the quiet solitude of my study. I had to remain still, forcing my rage into controlled anticipation. Nick stepped onto the stage like a conquering hero, basking in the glow of spotlights and the cheers of investors. He was wearing his victory like a tailored suit. For 30 minutes, he gave a soaring speech, detailing his bold new vision and the necessary evolution of Innovatech. He constantly emphasized the company's aggressive pivot away from outdated, garage-era technology. He made sure not to mention my name once. His final, calculated insult came when he looked directly into the camera. "This is not your grandfather's Innovatech. This is the future of the industry." The crowd erupted. The moment the product was officially unveiled, a sleek, powerful machine that genuinely looked like a masterpiece, was the moment the trap was fully sprung. Every single unit in the production line, every massive global contract Nick had just signed, and every ounce of projected revenue was now dependent on the single component utilizing my patented Titanium X alloy. Nick's triumph was absolute, untouchable, for one perfect day. He was celebrating on the deck of a sinking ship, completely unaware that I had drilled the hole. I took a deep, steadying breath. My lawyer, Arthur, confirmed the final details. The legal window was open. The celebratory champagne must have tasted sweet to Nick, but I knew my silence would taste like financial cyanide. The lawsuit was ready to file at midnight. The sun rose the day after the launch, but for Nick, it was the start of an endless night. While he was likely nursing a celebratory hangover, Arthur, my lawyer, was already filing the injunction. The legal action was swift and devastatingly simple. A cease and desist order combined with a massive intellectual property infringement lawsuit. The claim stated clearly that Innovatech was manufacturing and selling the Titan Next series using the Titanium X alloy, the proprietary formula of which was now legally owned by the Grace Trust. Since Innovatech's license for the alloy had quietly expired, a detail Nick's hasty audit team missed, the company was in massive violation. By 9 a.m., the federal marshals were reportedly serving the papers at Innovatech's headquarters, effectively freezing all production lines utilizing the patented component. My phone, which had been silent for months, suddenly became a frantic hotline. The first call was from the head of manufacturing, a good man named Robert, who had been too afraid to oppose Nick. His voice was tight with panic. "David, what in the world is happening? They just shut down the main floor. The feds are here, saying we can't touch the Titan line. It's about the alloy patent. They say we don't own it anymore." "That's correct, Robert," I replied, my voice calm, enjoying the sound of his genuine fear. "The ownership structure changed before my retirement. You're using property that belongs to a separate entity." "But Nick said he secured all assets. This is everything. We have millions in pre-orders," Robert pleaded. "That sounds like Nick's problem, not mine, Robert. Nick said my methods were obsolete. Turns out my paperwork was state-of-the-art." I hung up before he could ask for help. Then came the corporate counsel, spitting threats about slander and malpractice. I simply redirected them to Arthur, who was perfectly prepared to meet their aggression with irrefutable legal facts. Nick, meanwhile, remained strangely silent. He was likely locked in his newly remodeled office, watching his entire corporate empire dissolve around him, piece by agonizing piece. The shock was just setting in. The news spread through the financial world like wildfire. A small, seemingly insignificant legal entity, the Grace Trust, had filed a massive IP infringement suit against Innovatech, freezing the flagship Titan Next production line less than 24 hours after its glamorous launch. The stock market reacted with brutal efficiency. Innovatech's shares plummeted. I watched the ticker tape on my screen. The drop wasn't gradual. It was a free fall. Investors who had bought in on the hype of Nick's bold new vision were now dumping their shares in a panic. The value Nick had spent months inflating was erased in a single trading day. The situation inside the company was pure, unmitigated chaos. Manufacturing was stalled globally. The $100 million in marketing and pre-orders was now a massive liability. Customers were furious, demanding refunds for a product that could not legally be shipped. Worse, Nick's hasty removal of my quality control checks meant that even if he somehow found a way to use a substitute alloy, the units already produced were likely compromised, leading to potential recalls and further legal nightmares. The board, the same people who voted me out, were now frantically trying to contact me, but I didn't answer. I only communicated through Arthur. Nick, realizing the full scope of his blunder, finally started making desperate attempts to reach me directly. Texts, voicemails, emails, all filled with a sickening mix of rage and rapidly developing fear. One of his voicemails, which I still have, was particularly revealing. His voice was raw, stripped of all corporate polish. "David, you senile old fool. You think this is some kind of game? You're destroying the company we built. I'll sue you personally. You have to license that patent back, or we're finished." I listened to it and smiled. He was right. They were finished. He still didn't understand that the company's survival was irrelevant to me. My goal wasn't just to save Innovatech. It was to teach Nick the agonizing cost of betrayal. The destruction had to be absolute to be truly satisfying. Now, the stage was perfectly set for our final, highly anticipated confrontation. After days of calculated silence, I finally agreed to meet Nick. Not at the corporate headquarters, that fortress was already crumbling, but at my own home, the quiet, modest place he once visited for Thanksgiving dinners. It was about controlling the environment, reminding him exactly who held the true power. He arrived looking like a ghost. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his youthful confidence replaced by dark circles under his eyes and a frantic desperation. He didn't even attempt the false pleasantries. "David, please," he began, his voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the booming executive voice I was used to. "We need to talk about the patent. You have to lift the injunction. Just tell me what you want. Money? Your old seat? We can make this right." I remained seated in my favorite leather armchair, offering him nothing but a glass of water. "I already have the money, Nick. You tried to give me the seat back 3 days ago, but I declined. I left Innovatech because of you." He slammed his hand on the coffee table. "This is personal. You are ruining the lives of hundreds of innocent employees." "That's a lie, Nick. I am holding you accountable for ruining my life's work and attempting to bury me. You called my patent obsolete, yet your $100 million product depends on it. You stripped away my legacy based on arrogance and greed. Now, we talk price." I leaned forward, my voice low and firm. "The Grace Trust will license the Titanium X patent back to Innovatech under one condition, and one condition only: a lump sum payment. The total price will be the cumulative amount of Innovatech's current market capitalization, plus all the money spent on the Titan Next marketing campaign, all severance packages for the laid-off R&D staff, and a personal penalty. I want it all." Nick stared at me, his face pale. "You know that exceeds the company's total valuation right now. It would require an immediate fire sale. It would bankrupt the company and utterly destroy my career." Exactly, I confirmed, the long wait for this moment finally over. That is the price of trying to put an old dog out to pasture when he still controls the leash. You will sign over your shares and resign from the board and executive committee immediately. You will be held personally liable for all legal fees. I am not selling the patent. I am demanding retribution. You pushed me out, Nick. Now you will learn that legacy is not something you inherit. It's something you respect. The deal was non-negotiable, final, and utterly devastating. Nick had no choice. The legal and financial pressure was overwhelming. To save anything, he had to comply. Within a week, the final papers were signed. Nick resigned in disgrace, his corporate career a smoking ruin. The assets of Innovatech were quickly liquidated, primarily to pay off the massive liabilities created by my legal action and to cover the exorbitant price demanded by the Grace Trust. I watched the final dissolution with a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about the money, though the financial windfall was substantial. It was about the justice and the restoration of my integrity. Nick thought he was aggressive and modern, but he forgot the most fundamental rule of business. Never discard the foundation. With the dust settled, I turned my attention to the future. The Titanium X patent, now safely held in Grace's trust, wasn't just a weapon. It was a powerful asset. My granddaughter Grace was finishing her degree in sustainable engineering, passionate about applying innovative materials to environmental solutions. I decided to use the funds and the patent's exclusivity to mentor Grace. We launched a small, agile startup focused entirely on developing new, eco-friendly applications for the Titanium X alloy. It was a complete return to my roots, a small team, groundbreaking technology, and passion as the driving force. I was back in the lab, not as an executive battling board members, but as a mentor, passing on genuine knowledge to the next generation. This was the true legacy I wanted to build. My days are now filled with purpose, not corporate warfare. I am financially secure, my family is protected, and I wake up every morning excited to work on real engineering problems alongside my talented granddaughter. I learned that revenge, when executed with surgical precision, can be the necessary catalyst for rebirth. So, I've told you my whole story. I got my revenge, I reclaimed my legacy, and I built a better future. But I have to ask you, did I do the right thing? What would you have done in my place? Would you have been as ruthless, or would you have offered Nick a lifeline? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more unbelievable true stories of betrayal and sweet justice like this one, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into the corporate underworld. The end. Thank you for listening.